Welcome to the New York City Bar Association podcast. On today's episode, we honor Women's History Month with a special conversation between City Bar President Muhammad Faridi and Judge Bianka Perez, Associate Justice of the New York Supreme Court and President of the Supreme Court Justices Association. Opinions expressed are those of the speakers and not necessarily of the City Bar.
So it's March, it's Women's History Month. Real pleasure to be in conversation with Judge Bianka Perez today. What struck me most in preparing for this discussion with Judge Perez is how much of her story is rooted in work, how much of it is rooted in community and in persistence. She began her career not in a courtroom, but as a paralegal and then an office manager in the Bronx, working full-time while putting herself through law school in the evenings. And then from there, she built a career that involved representing people in some of the most difficult moments in their lives: family law, criminal defense, personal injury, before ultimately taking the bench. And what makes this journey even more powerful is that it never left the community that shaped it. Her career has been deeply rooted and tied to the Bronx. And today she serves as a justice in that very place where she began. Judge Perez's path is in many ways a story about what the legal profession can be doing at its very best, grounded in service, shaped by real experience, and connected to communities that we serve. So Judge Perez, thank you for being here today. Let's start at the beginning, because I think that's where your story really resonates with people. You didn't begin your career in the traditional way. You were working as a paralegal and an office manager while going to school at night. What did that period in your life look like day to day?
Chaos, a lot of work, a lot of hard work. And I do, of course, always remember my prior employer, Roberto Laracuente. He's the past president of the Puerto Rican Bar, who's since deceased, but he always instilled in me hard work. And I get emotional when I remember him, of course. But I can tell you, he always told me, Bianca, you have no reason to be sitting in that secretary's table or paralegal's table. You need to go to law school. You work harder and are smarter than any attorney in this firm. And I think having a mentor who tells you that and lets you know if you can also be that attorney sitting behind the big table in a big fancy firm with the nice window behind you, it's something that you don't believe it till someone tells you. And he definitely told me, and I did apply to law school in 1995 while I was working at the firm as a paralegal. I then was promoted to office manager. And of course, once I graduated law school, I did the evening division. I was offered a position as an associate, but it was hard. I was going to work 9 to 6, Monday through Friday. I accepted the admission at New York Law School because it was only 2 blocks away from my job. And I knew any other school I went to was going to be hard to get there before the classes began. And of course, I literally ran at 6 o'clock to my 6 o'clock class. And I was always walking in late. And that's what I did for 4 years in the evening division. It wasn't easy, but it's possible. And if you want it, it can happen.
And Judge, even though that experience is now, about 30 years from now, right?
31.
Yeah, so that experience that you've had, even though it's 31 years from now, I imagine that it gave you a different lens through which you view the profession today. So do you think that starting your career in that way, working while studying, changed how you see the law even today?
I would never change it. I tell everyone, you need to practice law before you're a judge. You have to be at that firm and work and realize how hard it is to be a private practitioner. I do see a lot of judges who go from law school to law clerk to judge, and they just really haven't dealt with what it is to be in private practice. Private practice, you're dealing with deadlines, you're dealing with pleadings that have to be filed by a date. We used to go to court all day, get back to the office, work, do all the paperwork all night, leave my office at midnight to start again in the next morning. And that's private practice. I don't know that there are some law clerks, obviously, that work just as hard, depending on the courtroom you're sitting and the volume of cases. But private practice is important to sit on the bench and know how hard private practitioners work and be a little more sympathetic towards them. Because I do hear that a lot. I hear from the attorneys, oh, you were in private practice, good. Maybe you understand my struggle. I do.
Well, we're gonna come back and talk a little bit more about private practice.
Right.
I want to go back really to your time period as a law student,
Yeah.
go to school in the evening, working during the daytime, right? And my question to you is, do you think that starting your career that way, working while studying, it changed the way you see the law at the very nascent stages of your legal career as a law student?
Well, I did work for a firm that only handled personal injury cases, and the bulk of the work was the CPLR, evidentiary issues, motions for summary judgment, torts litigation. And I can tell you, when I sat in my torts class, yes, I just had a different perspective than most of the students in the class. No question about that. And in the CPLR, we took New York practice. I pretty much was very familiar with New York practice, and a lot of the students in the class were lost. I mean, completely lost. So I can tell you there were some classes that it really helped me in, and I had a different perspective on the work. But there was also other classes like constitutional law and, mostly constitutional law, let's say, and properties. Properties was also a class that to me was very difficult. And having practice in torts litigation, to me, was a great experience. Just sitting in the class just helped me a lot. So I would actually recommend it. Yes, practice law, work for a law firm before you go to law school, if that's possible. 'Cause just learning these things from scratch, from the beginning, without understanding how it's applied in private practice is hard.
And Judge, after graduating from law school, and mentioned this earlier, you spent more than, I think, 2 decades practicing in areas like family law and criminal law and personal injury. Those areas, when you're dealing with people at really vulnerable stages and moments of their lives, how did that shape you, both as a lawyer and now as a judge?
Well, I can tell you that I wanted to practice in other areas. So I did eventually leave the firm to open up my own private practice and have a general practice, because to me, although I still love personal injury and I love torts, it just wasn't enough for me. I wanted to do what my community needed me to be there for, right? I'm a bilingual Dominican. I grew up in Washington Heights, actually, and who moved to the Bronx eventually in 2006. But I always wanted my own law firm. I remember Roberto telling me, Bianca, you need to just have your own firm because you know how to do everything. From soups to nuts, right? So I just walked around the Bronx asking for office space. I remember and sharing an office with my very good friend, Matilde Sanchez, who actually convinced me to learn family law, to learn criminal defense. She was an ex-ADA. She did family law, and she basically taught me all the family law and criminal defense I learned while sharing an office with her for, I think, about 8 years. I was with her before she retired. But it was hard. I mean, family law is really hard. Like, I would sit there and just think about these cases day and night. It was just hard. really hard material. My clients would walk in, I had a storefront, they would tell me stories that I just couldn't believe. And I would give them advice. They didn't always necessarily follow him. I'm not a mandatory reporter. I have confidentiality and I have to pretty much swallow it and move on. It was hard. That's about as much as I could say about it. If you want to hear a specific story, I could write a book someday and I might. But yeah, we had some really rough walk-ins in my storefront office. Not only family law, criminal defense as well. Some criminal cases. My potential clients would walk in and some of them would tell me, yeah, I did it. I did it. And it's tough to decide to represent this client who you know it's guilty, right? And whether to accept. The good thing is you can always say you don't want to represent them, right? Sometimes I would just raise my fees because I knew the person was guilty and it would be a hard case to win. So I can't tell you it was an easy job to do, but I did want to learn family law, criminal defense, and other areas of the law. Because after over 15 years doing personal injury, you kind of just get tired of the same material over and over again. And I wanted to learn something new, and I wanted to hear more issues that are more relatable to my community, right? As a child of Dominican parents.
Well, let's
Yeah.
talk about community and your Dominican heritage and your deep roots in Washington Heights and the Bronx. And one thing that really stood out to me is how rooted you are in your community in the Bronx. And what does it mean to you to now serve on the bench in the same community where you built your career?
Right. So, I have certain rules in my life that I follow. And one of them is I'm not hiding my personal values. I'm not hiding who I am to ascend to a higher position or to get elected, right? And I'm Dominican. And everyone in the courthouse knows I'm Dominican, and everyone in the Bronx knows I'm Dominican. And I'm actually called the first Dominican. And I tell them, no, I'm not the first. I'm the first that publicly says it everywhere she goes because I guess I'm proud of my culture. I'm proud of my mom, who was very hardworking. I'm proud of the three Mirabal sisters that I look up to, one of them was the first attorney in the Dominican Republic to fight the dictatorship of Trujillo in the 1940s. And she went to law school defying the rules of the current dictator not to have women go to law school. And when you think about your culture and the fact that you have a mother who, from 1945, when she was born, I think he started in 1941, Rafael Trujillo. He was a dictator who ruled with a fist hand for almost 30 years. In 1961, he was killed by his own military and by the family of the Mirabal sisters that he killed because they defied all his rulings. And I look up to her because she was the first woman attorney in the Dominican Republic. And my mother spoke about her. My mother spoke about Trujillo. And when you hear these stories, they sort of give you a reason to fight and do what I'm doing now, which is, becoming the first appellate term justice of the court of Dominican descent, which I couldn't believe, but I did make history as the first. But I go to all the Dominican heritage events. Everybody is very proud of me. And I just want our country to know that we didn't all come to the U.S. to get arrested, to get deported, to sell drugs, because that was what we were known for in the 80s. And it was sad, because I grew up during a time where if you were Dominican, oh my God, wow, you're Dominican, really? It was a bad thing. And it was actually sad. And I felt like I surpassed so many levels of negativity and in my culture that at this point, I think I am helping my country, the Dominican Republic, change the perspectives that everyone in the exterior, we say the exterior. I think in Spanish and translate into English, so sometimes I have to pause. In the exterior, everybody think, well, why are we traveling to the Dominican, if we're not accomplishing anything? And I'm showing them we are accomplishing a lot. There are some rotten apples in the tree, but we're not all rotten apples.
And speaking of accomplishments, Judge, your accomplishments, your service hasn't just been in the courtroom. You've also taken on leadership roles in the community and public life. Can you talk a little bit about that? Can you tell us what is it that drew you to that broader public service, beyond just the legal practice?
So, one of the things I do remember from my mentor, Roberto, was he's the one who told me there was a Dominican Bar Association in 1995 when I started working from him. I never knew there was a Dominican bar. He said, look, you need to meet the president, Manuel Tavares. He now works for County Clerk Milton Tingling. He's been there over 30 years. Because you need to get involved with the Dominican Bar Association. You're Dominican. Dominicans are growing in New York, and they will be the next leaders in our community. And I always listen to Roberto because he also was very active with the Puerto Rican bar. And I remember going to all the Puerto Rican bar galas and the dinners and all the events. And eventually I remember him telling me, well, you're Dominican, you need to go to the Dominican bar. And that's how I got involved, to be honest with you, because I never knew there was a Dominican bar. And once I got involved with the Dominican Bar Association, became a member, I got on the board, and I really did care about the students, just engaging them, telling them they can be lawyers too. They can someday aspire to be a judge. I remember meeting Fabiola Soto, first Dominican judge ever elected in actually the entire country, is my understanding. Definitely in New York. She was the first elected of Dominican descent. And I always knew that one day that's what I wanted to do. Because Fabiola, I don't know if you know her, but she's got such a good heart. And all she did was care. And I love her. She's retired now and we still keep in touch, but she just gave me great advice. And I sat with her and watched what she did. And from the bench, the power that you have to change people's lives was just amazing. As an attorney, of course, I will appear in court, I will fight, I will argue for my client. I wouldn't always win. But as a judge, sometimes you have more discretion, more ways to deal with certain issues, legal issues. And the way I saw Judge Soto do it, also Judge Hill, Judge Sally Mansonet Daniels, it was just amazing. I knew someday I wanted to be where they were and hopefully make an impact on the community that I live in.
I expect, Judge, that there are probably occasions when what the law requires you to do as a judge departs from what is it that you want to do as a human being.
Oh, yeah.
Where your discretion is very limited. Tell us about that. And how do you navigate through those issues?
So I want to say just this past year, there's like 3 cases that my law clerk wrote 2 different drafts decisions, one denying the petition, one granting the petition, because I just didn't know what to do. The law told me you have to deny this petition. You cannot grant it. You're going to get reversed. And of course, I'm thinking in my head, who cares? I'll get reversed. But I am also thinking I need to care, right? Because I don't want to get reversed over certain issues. And I can't really discuss the issues because I don't know if I'll get appealed. But yeah, I denied the petition. I felt really bad for the petitioner And it's just hard. It's hard sometimes because you don't necessarily agree with the statute that you're interpreting, but it's pretty clear. The statute's pretty clear, and I have to follow the law. It's hard. I don't know that I can discuss this particular statute. I'm trying to think if there's one that I could know.
What's the most difficult part of being a judge?
Right. So one of the most difficult things is when you want to rule a certain way, but you cannot because you have to follow precedent. And the law requires you to follow, the higher court, the appellate division, the court of appeals, although you don't always agree. What's good about the law is there's gray areas where you can get creative and hopefully make new law. But those are rare. Those are really rare. But it's good when you do have those gray areas and you can make a difference. It's not great when there is no gray area and the law is pretty clear and you have to follow it when you disagree with it.
When people walk into your court, what do you want them to steal from you?
Well, the main thing is I want them to know I work very hard. I've read all their papers. I'm familiar with the case. I'm familiar with the law. And they've all had an opportunity to be heard in my courtroom. And that's what matters to me. Or you might lose, although I have to dismiss your petition because there's just no basis under the law to grant your petition. They've had an opportunity to be heard and they're happy. That's what I care the most.
Have there been moments, Judge, in your life on the bench when your own life experience helped you see something that might otherwise have been missed?
Yes. It's funny because I did get published on one case where this is an interesting one and I can discuss it because it's been, I think, over 9 years now. A gentleman filed to change his name and he had no proof of citizenship or how he obtained his citizenship. But there was papers missing. It was a little unclear how he became a citizen. And as a Dominicans, I do know certain instances of people I know that have done certain things that are not totally legal. Let's put it that way. And I felt that in this case, there were gaps in him entering the U.S. and how he obtained his citizenship. And I just needed more paperwork, and he just couldn't provide the paperwork. And so I denied his request to change his name because I honestly didn't believe what he was saying. Of course, that's not the basis I denied it on. It was more on the lack of paperwork to prove his citizenship. And I think my personal experiences on these issues were the reason I denied it. That's not. I can't say too much, but I'm trying to say enough so for you to understand.
Hopefully you were affirmed.
I wasn't appealed.
Okay, even better.
Yeah, I actually got published. Someone thought it was an interesting decision, the reporters. Yeah. That was one, an immigration issue. Yeah, it was just really weird.
Was there ever a moment along the way where you said to yourself that, look, I'm not sure if this path is the right path for me? When you thought that this path wasn't going to work out? And what did you do in those moments? Assuming you had them.
Right. So I always knew this was the path, right? I always felt like I always wanted to someday be a judge. I just didn't know that I wanted it so early, right? I was the commissioner of the Board of Elections, the first Latina president elected to the board. And, I was loving it there. Many controversial issues, many political issues, many election law issues, but I loved it. I remember one of my mentors tell me if they ever offer you a judgeship, because I had expressed interest in someday being a judge, do not turn it down. Even if you think you're too young. I was offered it at a young age. I did not. I declined it because I was happy. I was making a lot of money. I was making a lot of money in private practice, and I was, as I don't know if you know, but as a commissioner, it's only part-time, so you can still practice law. I was practicing law. I had my own firm. I was a part-time commissioner, ruling on a lot of very important issues: who gets on the ballot, who doesn't get on the ballot, and I was doing great things at the board. I was the first woman ever elected president of Latina Discernment, which I couldn't believe, but apparently it was a man's world at one point. Only the men got to be presidents of the board. And I can tell you that because of one mentor I had, when I was offered to run for judge and basically run unopposed, because the Republicans loved me at the Board of Elections and told me, we'll never run against you, Bianca. I had second thoughts because I was too young. I was only 44, and I was thinking, oh, I can be a judge in my 50s, or even, late 50s, even 60. And then I thought about my mentor. He turned it down. He regrets it. He was in private practice. But he just didn't have, basically his complaint was not having a pension, not having a secure retirement. And I definitely ran 10 years earlier than I wanted to, and here I am 10 years later, and I'm happy I did it. Private practice was hard. Being on the bench, of course, it has its difficulties, but it's not as hard as private practice. No. It's a lot more comfortable. You have better hours. You can go home when you want. The work can wait. In civil court, at least. Criminal court was hard. I spent 2 years in criminal court, and it was really hard because those issues are pressing and they are important and there are emergencies. But in Supreme Civil term, things can wait. Everything is not rush, and you're not killing yourself to get everything done.
Throughout our conversation, you've spoken about your mentors. You spoke about Roberto. You spoke about inspiration that you took from female lawyers in the Dominican Republic, the folks who mentored you through when you were on the Board of Elections. And now, you're on the other side of that. How do you think about mentoring the next generation of lawyers, the next generation of Bianca Perez's?
Right. Yeah. So definitely need a good mentor, somebody who cares and can relate to you, a relatable mentor, right? My number one priority is to mentor as many students as I can, to let them know that they can see me and someday they can be me. And I really do care about that. This podcast, I'm holding it, right before I'm going to John Jay College to speak to the students of the Dominican Students Association and the First Generation Students Association. I think that's the FGSA. It's wonderful. They have a First Generation Students Association. I love it. They're the first who ever went to college, and they have their own association. And I love speaking to them. I want to inspire and hopefully show these students at the college level, you can be a lawyer too one day. Because I remember being a lawyer. I remember being at John Jay, not knowing what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a police officer in the 90s. I went to John Jay in 1990. And in the 90s, I remember I wanted to be a police officer because I grew up in the 80s in Washington Heights during what they call the Dinkins era. Poor David Dinkins. He was a great mayor, but they were really hard times. We had the Dinkins, they called them the Dinkins era because there were a lot of riots. The police, a riot. There were dirty cops working with the drug dealers. The precinct I grew up in was called the Dirty 30, the 30th precinct, because 15 police officers were found to be working with the drug dealers. Yes. So I grew up in the dirty 30, and if you grew up in the 80s, you'll know what that is. Most of the students I speak to look at me like, what's the 80s? Of course, they weren't even born yet. But because I grew up in the 80s, because I grew up in a really bad neighborhood with drugs and riots, and I remember my mother telling me, do not look out the window, Bianca. Get out of the window, because she was afraid I might get shot. 'Cause the shootouts happened frequently, and you can get shot if you're too close to your window in those days. So to answer your question, yes, I want these students to know the struggles I went through, and here I am. I made it. And that's one of my number one priorities, of course, besides trying to get my girls to finish college and also become what they want to be. I'm not forcing them to be lawyers. I don't speak to the ones who want to be lawyers about law school. If you want to be a doctor, like my 17-year-old, she wants to go to medical school, I encourage that as well. I have a computer science major. She loves the web, the computers, the software. She wants to create her own software. And then I have a future social work. She's getting her master's in social work. Although I want to tell her don't do it, but I won't. I'll let her figure it out on her own. It's a lot of work to be a social worker.
Well, on social work, you spend as a judge your time dealing with other people's problems, and often you deal with the hardest moments that people have in their lives. How do you carry that as a judge? How do you not carry it home? How does it impact what happens at home?
I'll be honest with you, I do carry it, right? One of the highest professions of alcohol abuse is the law, and you just carry it with you. I try to keep myself busy during the weekends and not think about it, right? And another thing is, my first 2 years in criminal court were really hard. I didn't sleep. I landed in the hospital for 3 days. With severe migraines. The doctors could not find what was wrong with me. After 3 days, they sent me home with a diagnosis of stress and told me, don't work so hard.
You know what my doctor says? He says when doctors don't really know the answer to the question, they don't really know what's happening to you. They just blame it on stress. That's the easy way out.
That's what they told me. And apparently, I guess it was true, because that was 10 years ago, and I haven't had those severe migraines since. It was like really bad. I couldn't open my eyes. That's how bad the migraines were. And I think it was criminal court. It was a lot. Arraignments all night, getting home at 2:00 in the morning, getting up at 7 a.m. to take my daughters to school. It was a lot. And, you're supposed to go to sleep because you have to work again at 5 or 4. I think we started at 4 or 5 o'clock. But I never slept. And at one point I just crashed. And I landed in the hospital. So it was really hard. You do take it home, to answer your question. You do not. There's just no way not to take it home. You just have to find a way to cope with it. Therapy, friends, discuss it with family. My poor husband, he's my therapist, because he listens to all the stories. And that's what you need. You need family, you need company, just to discuss it, because it's there and there's just no way to disassociate yourself from what you hear all day. There just isn't.
Judge, what part of your story do you think people misunderstand? Or do you think that they don't fully understand?
My passion, I believe, is one of the reasons I am misunderstood. I will definitely blame myself for that. I have learned through the years that as a leader of various bar and judicial associations, I cannot lead only with passion. I need to have the data to back the position I'm taking and a little less passion so that I'm not misunderstood. As you know, I was the past president of the Dominican Bar Association. I was also the district director of the National Association for Women Judges. I am now president of the Association of Justices of the Supreme Court. So I do have to deal with sometimes some controversial issues. And now I'm sort of learning how to back it up with data, not just with passion.
I assume that your definition of success has evolved over the years. And today, how does Bianca Perez define success?
Oh, wow. You're right, because even just passing the bar to me was a challenge, and I never thought I could accomplish that. And that was my definition of success then. At this point in my career, I think I've accomplished the first appellate term justice of Dominican descent, the first Dominican president of the Association of Justices of the Supreme Court, the first Latina president of the Board of Elections. Just to me, just creating history and making my people proud, my Dominican people proud, it is the definition of success. I don't need the money. I don't need the accolades. The success is showing the next generation of leaders that you can do this too, especially my 3 daughters, raising them to be accomplished, good citizens.
So I want to close, Judge, with where we began with your journey. From working in the law office in the Bronx, while going to school at night, to building a career representing people in some of the most difficult moments of their lives, to now serving on the bench in that same community. You have lived a path that so many people don't often see reflected in the legal profession. So let me ask you this. For someone out there, maybe a young person in the Bronx, a Latina, maybe someone working while trying to build out a future, what do you hope that they take from your story?
What would I tell a Latina like myself, 30 years younger? Always remember that you cannot do this alone. You need family. You need friends. Human connection is always important. Everything is always better together. So just try to surround yourself, as Oprah Winfrey says, with people who will fill your cup. I never forget, she always says that in her show. And another thing I'd tell a younger self is when you're second guessing your decisions, whichever decision you have to make, like I sometimes second guess myself when I'm working with the association, various associations that I have led and lead now. Just remember, always do the right thing. People will always notice when you do the right thing. And if you do the right thing, it will bring you inner peace, whether someone disagrees with it or not. And to end it on Women's History Month, always remember everything is better with women. We are the next generation of leaders. More women in business has been proven to increase the economy. If we control the government, we would also have less war. Someone will always belittle you, but you have to be okay with it. You have to always remember that not everyone is going to like you. It's okay to be unlikable. You cannot make everyone happy. And of course, I want the next Latina leaders to always make sure that when you rise, you will always dedicate your time and energy to make sure other women around you also rise, and just try to pay it forward. That's what I try to do with my mentorship work with various associations and organizations that I'm part of.
Judge Perez, thank you, not just for your time today, but for the example that you've set through your work and your service. And it's been a real pleasure and a privilege to have this conversation with you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure seeing you again.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the New York City Bar Association podcast. Opinions expressed are those of the speakers and not necessarily of the City Bar. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like and subscribe wherever you listen. Find more City Bar podcasts on Apple, Spotify, YouTube Music, iHeart, or at our website at www.nycbar.org/podcasts. Be sure to check out This Lawyer's Life, a professional development podcast where we talk with lawyers about seizing opportunities, learning lessons the hard way, and about what makes them tick. And don't miss Building Belonging, a podcast that embraces authentic conversations about DEIB solutions by amplifying the most marginalized voices in the legal industry and exploring spaces others dare not. This podcast was produced and edited by Eli Cohen.